April 16, 1945. 14:27 hours. Somewhere over the Bavarian countryside, 30 miles southeast of Nuremberg, Captain James Hammer Caldwell banks his P-51D Mustang hard left. His eyes locked on the thin ribbon of road cutting through the pine forest below. The afternoon sun glints off his canopy as he rolls inverted for a better view. There, a German convoy, 12 trucks minimum, maybe more, crawling like insects through a narrow mountain pass. His wingmen crackle through the radio, voices tight, with combat readiness, calling out the formation. Standard procedure would be a shallow strafing run, maybe 20 degrees. Hit them in 2 or 3 passes. Minimize exposure to ground fire. Caldwell's response freezes everyone on the channel. He's going vertical. 90 degrees. Straight down. What happens in the next 47 seconds will either validate the most audacious ground attack technique ever attempted in a P-51, or it will scatter Caldwell's remains across 300 yards of German forest. The P-51 Mustang wasn't designed for this. North American Aviation built it as an escort fighter, a long-range predator meant to shepherd bomber formations deep into Nazi territory and tangle with Messerschmitts at 25,000 feet. Its Packard-built Merlin V1650 engine generated 1,490 horsepower, pushing the aircraft to 437 miles per hour in level flight. The laminar flow wing design gave it exceptional range, over 1,650 miles with drop tanks. But that same wing made it tricky in high-speed dives. The aircraft's 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 3 in each wing, carried 1,880 rounds total, enough for approximately 34 seconds of continuous fire. Fighter pilots loved the Mustang for its speed and agility in dogfights. They didn't love it for what Caldwell was about to do. By April 1945, the air war over Europe had fundamentally changed. The Luftwaffe was a gutted shell of its former self. Scattered and fuel-starved, Allied fighters increasingly found themselves without aerial opponents, their guns silent, their skills wasted. Squadron commanders began assigning ground attack missions, targets of opportunity, anything to contribute to the final push into Germany. The ground attack in a P-51 was dangerous work, fundamentally different from the aerial ballet these pilots trained for. German flak crews were experienced, deadly, and desperate. A single 20mm shell through the coolant system meant a dead engine. The Mustang had no armor underneath, just aluminum skin barely thicker than a beer can. Standard doctrine emphasized speed and shallow angles. Get in, hit them, get out before they could track you. Caldwell had different ideas. 28 years old, from Bakersfield, California. He'd arrived in England with the 357 Fighter Group in late 1943, accumulating 7 confirmed kills by June 1944. He was methodical, analytical, the kind of pilot who studied ballistics, tables and engineering manuals instead of playing cards between missions. His squadron mates called him Hammer not because he hit hard, but because he approached every problem like a nail. Same technique, same precision, over and over until it worked. In January 1945, during a routine strafe of a German airfield, Caldwell noticed something that would consume his thinking for the next 3 months. He'd made a firing pass at a parked Focke-Wulf 190, standard 30-degree dive, and watched his tracers arc high and right despite perfect aim. The ballistics frustrated him. At 300 miles per hour in a shallow dive, the Mustang's trajectory carried it forward while the bullets fell in a complex parabola. You weren't shooting at the target. You were shooting at where you calculated it would be relative to your continuing motion. The math was imprecise, instinctive, and it meant you needed multiple passes to guarantee hits. Multiple passes meant multiple exposures to ground fire. The longer you stayed in the engagement envelope, the higher the probability of a golden BB finding your aircraft. What if you eliminated the horizontal component entirely? What if you came down perfectly vertical, gravity and engine power aligned? The target stationary in your gun sight. The ballistics would be simple, almost trivial. Your rounds would travel in an almost straight line relative to your dive angle. Time on target would be minimal, perhaps 5 seconds of exposure, The Germans wouldn't expect it. Standard flak doctrine assumed aircraft would approach at shallow angles. A vertical dive would confuse their tracking, give them less time to calculate deflection. But the risks were enormous. You'd be accelerating toward terminal velocity. The controls would stiffen as dynamic pressure increased, and you'd need to pull out at exactly the right moment, or you'd auger straight into the ground. The G-forces during recovery could black you out or rip the wings off the airframe. Caldwell tested the theory on empty fields, abandoned vehicles, anything that wouldn't shoot back. He'd climb to 12,000 feet, roll inverted, pull through until the nose pointed straight down, then accelerate at 8,000 feet. He'd stabilize the dive, get the Pipper on target. At 4,000 feet, he'd fire a 2-second burst, purely experimental. At 2,000 feet, he'd pull hard. The Mustang would shudder and groan, the altimeter unwinding like a broken watch, and then suddenly you'd be climbing again. Blood draining from your head, vision tunneling, every muscle in your body tensed. Against the G-suit pressure, his crew chief noticed the stress cracks forming in the wing roots after the 4th practice dive. Caldwell ordered them repaired but didn't stop testing. His squadron commander, Major Robert Foy, heard about the experiments through the maintenance reports. The conversation in Foy's office was brief and pointed. This wasn't fighter tactics. This was stunt flying. One mistake and the Army Air Force would be writing a letter to Caldwell's mother explaining her son had died testing a maneuver that violated every principle. In the tactical manual, Caldwell argued the math, the ballistics, the potential kill ratio. Foy remained unconvinced but didn't explicitly forbid the technique. Fighter pilots had latitude, especially experienced ones with kills to their credit. Just don't crash, Foy said. And don't make me explain this to General Kepner. April 16th presented perfect hunting weather. Visibility unlimited, scattered clouds at 6,000 feet. Light winds. The 357th launched a sweep mission targeting transportation infrastructure. In southern Germany, Caldwell led a 4-ship flight, call sign Cement Flight, with 3 younger pilots who joined the squadron in March. The primary target was a rail yard near Regensburg, but intelligence reported increased truck traffic as German forces attempted to move supplies using roads instead of the created rail network. Any convoy encountered was a free target. They found it at 1425, approximately 30 miles southeast of Nuremberg. 12 trucks, possibly 15, strung out along a narrow road cutting through dense forest. Caldwell's wingman, Lieutenant Thomas Bracken, spotted them first, called them out at 2 o'clock low. Standard tactical response would be a 4-ship strafing run, line abreast, shallow angle. The trucks were vulnerable, probably supply vehicles, no visible flak protection. It should have been simple. Caldwell keyed his radio. Cement Flight. This is Cement Lead. I'm taking them vertical. You 3 maintain cap at 8,000. Cover my recovery. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, an eternity in combat time. Bracken finally responded, voice uncertain. Lead. Confirm vertical dive. Caldwell was already climbing, throttle forward, pulling the Mustang's nose toward the sun. Confirmed. Watch for flak. If I don't pull out. You know what happened? At 12,000 feet, he leveled briefly, positioned the Mustang directly above the convoy's projected position. The trucks were still moving, perhaps 20 miles per hour, trying to maintain spacing on the narrow road. He could see the trees pressing close on both sides, a natural corridor with no escape routes. Perfect. He rolled inverted, the horizon rotating 180 degrees, Germany suddenly above him, the sky below. Then he pulled. The world became vertical. The Mustang's nose swung through the arc, past the horizon, past 45 degrees, past 60, until the convoy sat motionless in his gun sight. Growing larger with each second, the airspeed indicator spun clockwise, 250 miles per hour. 300, 350. The engine screamed at full power, adding thrust to gravity's acceleration. Wind noise increased to a banshee wail. The controls stiffened as dynamic pressure built. At 400 miles per hour in a 90-degree dive, the Mustang became a barely controlled missile. The slipstream hammering the airframe, every rivet and seam, tested against forces the designers never intended. At 6,000 feet, Caldwell could distinguish individual trucks, their canvas covers, the spacing between vehicles. No visible flak positions. Either they didn't have any or the gunners were too stunned by the vertical approach to react. At 4,000 feet, he centered the gun sight pipper on the lead truck and pressed the trigger. All 6 Brownings erupted simultaneously, 1,880 rounds per minute combined rate of fire, approximately 188 rounds per second hammering downward. The ballistics were exactly as he'd calculated. No deflection, no complex arc, just straight-line geometry. The tracers fell like a laser, every 5th round visible. The rest invisible, but equally deadly. The lead truck disintegrated, then the second, then the third. Caldwell walked the rudder pedals, slewing the gun sight left and right. The bullets forming a cone of destruction that enveloped the convoy. At 2,000 feet, he released the trigger and pulled. The control column came back into his lap with both hands, arms straining. The Mustang's nose rising with agonizing slowness. The G-forces hit like a collapsing building. 4 Gs. 5. 6. His vision grayed at the edges, blood forcing down from his brain toward his feet despite the G-suit inflation. The altimeter showed 1,000 to 100 feet. Still descending, the nose still below the horizon. Pull harder. The wing roots groaned. 7 Gs. The aircraft was approaching structural limits. At 800 feet, the nose finally reached level. At 600 feet, it passed through the horizon and started climbing. Caldwell's vision returned. The gray tunnel expanding back to normal peripheral awareness. Behind him, the convoy was burning. Bracken's voice came through the radio, high and tight with adrenaline. Lead, you're clear. Climbing through 2,000. Holy God. The entire convoy is on fire. Caldwell leveled at 8,000 feet, heart hammering, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and the physical strain of the pullout. He banked left, circling back to assess the damage. What he saw justified every practice dive, every stress crack, every argument with Major Foy. 12 trucks destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. The vertical attack had concentrated his fire with devastating efficiency. The 47-second engagement, from dive initiation to pullout, had delivered approximately 150 rounds onto a target area less than 200 yards long. The trucks burned in a neat line, secondary explosions suggesting ammunition or fuel. Cargo. Several vehicles had careened off the road, their drivers dead or panicked. No return fire had been observed. The German gunners, if any existed, never had time to establish a tracking solution. The after-action report, filed at 1830 that evening, used conservative language. Flight lead executed steep dive attack on enemy convoy, resulting in destruction of 12 vehicles. Gun camera footage, reviewed by intelligence officers 3 days later, told a different story. The film showed a technique so radical, so contrary to established doctrine, that copies were immediately forwarded to Tactical Air Command headquarters in England. Within 2 weeks, Caldwell was summoned to brief a room full of colonels and training officers on the ballistics. The approach angle, the pull-out timing, everything. The military bureaucracy moved with surprising speed. By May 1945, as the war in Europe entered its final days, ground attack doctrine for the P-51 had been officially modified to include vertical dive attacks as an approved technique for experienced pilots under specific conditions. The conditions were stringent. Minimum altitude of 10,000 feet for dive initiation. Clear weather, minimal ground fire expected, target concentration sufficient to justify the risk. Caldwell's 47 seconds over Bavaria had rewritten tactical manuals. The personal cost was invisible, but real. Caldwell flew 18 more missions before V-Day, destroying an additional 43 vehicles using the vertical technique. Plus 2 trains and a fuel depot. His Mustang required wing spar replacement twice due to stress damage from high G pullouts, he never spoke publicly about the fear each dive generated. The moment at 12,000 feet when you rolled inverted and committed to a maneuver. That allowed no hesitation, no second guessing. One miscalculation of pull-out altitude meant death. One frozen control surface meant death. One moment of target fixation, staring too long at the trucks growing in your gun sight, meant death. Today, the April 16th attack exists in military aviation history as a footnote to larger narratives about P-51 operations. And the final months of the European Air War, Caldwell returned to California, worked as a test pilot for North American aviation until 1952, then disappeared into civilian life. He died in 1998, age 81, having never granted interviews about the war. The gun camera footage from that 47-second dive remains in National Archives holdings, occasionally shown in training contexts as an example of innovative tactical thinking. Under combat conditions, 12 trucks destroyed. 1 pass. The numbers speak with brutal simplicity, but they don't capture the moment at 14:27 hours, when a 28-year-old pilot from Bakersfield rolled his Mustang inverted above the Bavarian forest and proved that sometimes the line between suicide and genius is measured in nothing more than altitude, timing, and the willingness to pull.